Hello everybody, welcome to Totally Tabled. My name is Shaggy, and today I'm doing another top 10 list. This time, my favorite cooperative games. I absolutely adore cooperative games, one of my favorite genres, but there are some notable games that are not going to be on this list, and I want to explain why. A lot of games that are technically co-ops, I either haven't played cooperatively or I just don't want to, because I consider them to be solo-only games. There's a couple of big ones, one of them being This War of Mine. Technically, you can play it as a co-op. I never have, and I really have no desire to. To me, it's really a solo game that has some cooperative rules sort of bolted onto it and not in a very great way. Also games like Sprawlopolis or Lost Expedition or all of the Oniverse games. All of those games have cooperative rules, but I have only played them solo or I prefer to play them solo, so they will not be on this list. The good news is I have talked about all of those games in my prior lists, especially in my top 10 solo games and my 11 through 20 top solo games. So if you want to hear more about those games, go check out those lists. Anyway, let's get started right away with my number 10. And that would be Forgotten Waters. In this game, you play as pirates going on crazy adventures. You play through a scenario, a grand story that is all on an app. And in fact, the entire thing is voice acted, which is absolutely incredible. The voice acting here is amazing and really immerses you in this crazy kind of magical fantasy pirate world. It's very lighthearted and funny, and honestly, the app works fantastically. But this really is about the experiencing this story. You are making decisions, and there is this wonderful, timed worker placement thing where you're given a list of different actions that you can take based on where you are or what's going on, and you quickly place your character on a worker placement spot. Hopefully a spot that they have the skills to do well. And you all have to discuss that and pick it very quickly. You then just resolve the worker placement spots, and a lot of times it involves a little extra story where you have to make decisions and oftentimes roll for a skill. A lot of dice rolling, and you're rolling these D12s, and depending on the amount that you get, different things are going to happen. You're going to have different levels of successes and failures. Improving your skills, getting cards that give you special abilities. It's a ton of fun. It's a really great romp of an adventure each time, and there's a number of different scenarios that you can go through. Each one quite long, in fact. So we haven't even played the entire game all the way through yet. There's so much content, but we've had a fantastic time so far with the scenarios that we have played. So that's my number 10, Forgotten Waters. Number 9 is Ghost Stories. In Ghost Stories, players are monks trying to defend a village from wave after wave of beautifully drawn monsters. It's basically a tower defense game where you're moving around a 3x3 grid of sort of random tiles, each with these special actions, and you're using those in order to vanquish all manner of nightmares. Spirits, demons, abominations. It is incredibly difficult and unrelenting. Just when you think you have a handle on things, more and more monsters show up. These different ghosts. Incredibly beautiful artwork. And in order to survive, you really have to use a lot of teamwork and strategy and collaborate with one another. And that's what I really care about in a cooperative game. This is one of the earlier games that I bought, and I used to play it a lot, but not so much anymore. So there's a little bit of nostalgia sort of factoring into this pick. But even after all this time, the gameplay holds up. The artwork is some of the best that I've ever seen in any board game. It really is a classic. That's my number 9, Ghost Stories. It wouldn't be a Totally Tabled top 10 list unless there was a massive amount of cheating going on. And our number 8 is very much a massive cheat because I'm including 3 games. 3 party-like cooperative games. And the one you're going to pick is based on player count. So my number 8 is Codenames Duet if you're at 2 players. So Clover if you're at 3 or 4 players. and just 1 if you're at 5 to 7 players. Okay? And I've clumped these 3 together because they kind of fit that same sort of party-esque co-op style. Even though Codenames Duet is just for 2 players, it's still sort of a party game. It's a 2-player version of Codenames, a game that I adore, and I actually like this version better. Turning Codenames into a 2-player cooperative game is, just a brilliant design feat. You are simultaneously giving clues, just as you would in Codenames, to your partner. You're working off the same grid of words, but you have your own template showing which words you're trying to get them to pick. And you just go back and forth and you try to get it done in a certain number of guesses. Just really clever stuff, and it's so much fun. You could technically play it with more than 2, but it obviously works best at 2. Just fantastic. Now, So Clover is kind of a similar, word style game where you are writing clues to try to get the other players to guess the orientation of these tiles that each have 4 words on them. And it's very clever because, you can use the other clues to try to help you with some of the other ones. And it seems like it would be easy, but man, this game is so hard. Maybe it's just me, but I find coming up with, because you have these pair of words and you're trying to come up with one clue that will incorporate both words, and they could just be anything. So it's very hard to come up with those clues. The cool thing here is that everyone is doing that at the same time. And then once everyone has completed that, you go one by one doing the guesses. So there's no downtime whatsoever. Really clever stuff and a really clever production to make that all come together and work seamlessly. Highly recommended, and in my mind, best at like that 3 to 4 player range. And then if I have 5 or more players, I'm breaking out just 1. Maybe the original co-op party game, or at least the one that really made it popular. Really simple concept here where you have one person who's going to be guessing. Everyone else gets to see the word that you're trying to get them to guess, and everyone is secretly writing a 1-word clue. Then they all look at the clues that they've given, and if any of the clues are the same, then you have to throw those out. So you have to be careful about what clues you give. You don't want them to be too obvious, because then you might match with other people, but you also don't want them to be too obscure, because then the person guessing won't have very good clues to guess with. It's super simple and works so great with a big crowd. Just really one of the most perfect party games out there. That's just one. Number 7 is a game that you've heard me talk about many times. I've even done a full playthrough of this one, and that is The Loop. This one works fantastically both solo and cooperatively. A really fun, puzzly cooperative game with a really fun theme and this very clever card play system where you can loop cards, use them over and over again if you manage to line things up properly. I've talked about this in my top solo games of all time. And like I said, I've done a complete playthrough. Watch the playthrough to just see how clever and interesting the card play is. It also has this really fun cube tower system where you're dropping cubes in this little plastic tower that's then distributing them randomly into 3 different sectors. You're trying to keep those cubes from piling up. It's colorful, it's fun, it's got a ton of replayability. This one has flown under the radar, as I've said, and I just cannot understand why. There's even an expansion out now. I hope to do a playthrough of that one, but man, this is such a great game. Don't let this one pass you by. I feel like I'm the only one banging the drum of this game, but I really think it's one that you should check out. That's my number 7, The Loop. My number 6 is Arkham Horror, the living card game. Sometimes I just want to go on, a goofy, adventurous ride. Just sort of turn off my brain a little bit, just explore, push my luck, roll some dice, or in this case, draw tokens from a bag, and just experience a fun story. And that's what the Arkham Horror card game gives me. It's not something I want to do all the time, but I've had so much fun with this game in a cooperative setting, just experiencing the interesting story and the different surprises and the creative use of the cards. This feels like a board game, but just with cards. And it is so packed full of ideas. I mean, look, Cthulhu is a little played out for me. I'm not like a huge Lovecraftian fan or anything like that, but at least it's interesting. It's more interesting than zombies for sure. And I find the system of pushing your luck to be really interesting here. I don't know. I keep coming back to this one and it never disappoints me. It was always endlessly interesting. So that is my number 6, Arkham Horror, the living card game. Number 5 is another game that I've mentioned before, and it's also a little bit of a cheat. This is Pandemic Iberia. But really, you can put any of the pandemics. This is really the pandemic system. The pandemic legacies, just base pandemic. My favorite is Pandemic Iberia. I really love the little things that Iberia adds to the pandemic system. The water, the railroads, and I prefer the historical setting. I think the added mechanisms, they just add, they're not very complicated, but it adds just enough interesting strategic choices. Like, am I going to focus on building a train network so I can move about the map quicker in the future? Or do I really try to mop up the sick patients right now? Do I spend a few extra actions to lay down some purified water in these sort of areas, but between the cities, so that I don't need to like return to that part of the map as sick people start showing up? I think unlike some of the other pandemic variants, Iberia adds a lot of strategic depth without overcomplicating, the sort of the core perfect pandemic system. But of course, any pandemic makes for a wonderful cooperative experience for pretty much anybody. And so, whichever one is your favorite, you can sort of stick that in here. That's my number 5, the pandemic system, but in particular, Pandemic Iberia. My number 4 is an incredibly popular game. It's Spirit Island. This is a game that I actually left off of my top solo games because despite having played it several times, I still am not quite sure how I feel about the solo game. But as a 2-player cooperative game, specifically as a 2-player cooperative game, I'm all in. I love this at that player count. Now, this is a little bit more complicated than I normally like to play for cooperative games. But when I'm in the mood for something that's going to absolutely break my brain, this is great. I mean, first of all, the theme is to die for. How great is it to finally be fighting back against colonial invaders rather than embodying them? I think the box sums it up best. It says the cooperative settler destruction strategy game. And that's exactly what you're doing here. I love that you're playing these crazy, ancient, powerful spirits charged with protecting the land and the inhabitants of the land against these invaders. It's so refreshing. And the gameplay here is just absolutely top-notch. The invaders use this sort of 3-step system for, creating havoc on the island. First they explore, they show up onto the island, then they start building buildings, and then finally they start blighting the land. And so you're using these cards with all these powers to try to wipe them out or, generate enough fear, spread enough fear among them to sort of scare them away. And there's all these different types of spirits, each have their own deck with all these different special abilities. And it's really clever because your actions, they're either fast or slow, which means they're either going to be able to resolve before the invaders take their action or after. And that can make a real big difference. You really have to wrestle with that and try to make sure you're timing everything right. Whew, like I said, this is a heavy, there's a huge learning curve here, but As a 2-player cooperative game with some real crunch, man, fantastic. There's a reason this is so popular, and it's my number 4, Spirit Island. Number 3 is The Crew. In particular, the sequel, which I believe is called Mission Deep Sea or Deep Sea Mission, one of those two. The Crew is simply a cooperative trick-taking game. You are given these missions, and in the original one, it was sort of like, this person needs to take some specific card, like, the 3 of pink, or the 7 of yellow. So everyone has a mission that they're trying to complete. In the sequel, some of these missions are a little bit more interesting and creative, like, you have to take a trick with the sum of all the cards is 25, or something like that. Or, you can't take any blue cards whatsoever. It's stuff like that. And they can get really interesting and really difficult to achieve, right? But everyone has these missions. And then without really communicating, you just start playing a trick-taking game. And you are just trying to play the cards in such a way that those missions will happen. And you really have to use your knowledge of trick-taking. I mean, this isn't a game for someone who is new to trick-taking. It really is important that you understand all the subtle communication and deduction that you can achieve just through the mechanisms of trick-taking. It's actually very thinky because it matters what cards you slough. You really have to read into the cards that people are playing. And it does feel much more like a deduction game than a trick-taking game. You have very limited communication. You're able to put down a single card, show the table a single card that you have, and then indicate whether it's the highest in that suit, the lowest in that suit, or the only card you have in that suit. And that's all you have. And in some missions, you don't even get that. So it's fascinating, and there's a ton of pressure. I think the reason some people might not like this game is that it really puts you on the spot. A single mistake can cost you that mission, and you have to, redo it. Even just sloughing the wrong card at the wrong time or something can really ruin your chances. But it is so satisfying when everybody's on the same page and you achieve something that seemed impossible. And it happens all the time. You can really, a group can really get good at this game and get better and better. Oh, it's so much fun. I've been playing a ton of this with my friends on Board Game Arena, actually. Just one of the most satisfying cooperative games I've ever played. That's my number 3, The Crew. Okay, my number 2 and number 1 are not going to be a big surprise to anyone who follows the channel. I'm not going to speak a great deal on these because I've spoken about them many times before. My number 2 is Gloomhaven. And again, this includes Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, and I assume it's going to include Gloomhaven or Frosthaven when that comes out. But the Gloomhaven system, I love it. It's fantastic. It's fantastic solo, where I've spoken about it as one of my favorite solo games of all time. And it's great cooperative. And I've played it probably even more cooperatively than I've played it solo. Wonderful cooperative game. A lot of opportunities to, for teamwork and to work collaboratively and get things done. Very satisfying when you figure out a dungeon. A lot of times they feel very puzzly, but it's just so much fun to progress your character and to go through the story. It's just such a wonderful, fun system. I'm definitely in the majority for loving this game, so I don't think I have to be too convincing here. Gloomhaven, fantastic. And my number 1, super obvious here, it's Robinson Crusoe. Spoiler alert, it's my favorite solo game. It's also my favorite cooperative game. I've spoken about this one at length, and I've done a full solo playthrough of one of the scenarios. So please go watch that. I'm very proud of that playthrough. I really love the way that one turned out. This game is just so great, and there's so much game here. What I always want to say about Robinson Crusoe is it's not just a game, it's a game system. It comes with 6 scenarios that are completely different. They tweak the rules, but you get a completely different experience, a different story out of it. And every game that I've played of Robinson Crusoe has always had this wonderful survival narrative that takes place. That's always compelling and interesting. There's always fun and exciting things going on, and you just have incredible, difficult decisions. This is a hard game, but it's not as punishing as people make it out. You know, when you start to understand the game and you can learn these little techniques, the game really opens up and it becomes difficult but fair, with a lot of thrilling moments, a lot of, nail-biting stuff going on. Please go watch the playthrough because I think it just perfectly shows off why I love this game so much. It can be difficult to get into. It can take a little bit of work, but it's so worth it. And with the new collector's edition coming out, I just can't wait. It is so much fun. It's just an absolute masterpiece, whether you're playing solo or playing cooperatively. So there you go. Number 1, no big surprise, Robinson Crusoe. 10, I think I even mentioned more than 10 games there. Brilliant cooperative games. There are so many great cooperative games out there. Wonderful ones that I didn't even mention here. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, check out some of my videos. I've done playthroughs on several of these games. Go check those out. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.